What is up, my friends? I said I would make a quiz review video about political ideology. So I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes or less and give you all the things you need to know. The number one thing, though, to do to make sure you understand this is how you'll be tested, which is can you take a viewpoint, policy idea, or opinion and talk about whether or not it is liberal or conservative, and talk about whether or not it's economic or social. So again, as Ellie would say, this is for our purposes of our 10th grade government class. Some of this stuff might be simplified a little bit, but it'll be okay overall. So in order to understand where somebody lies on the political spectrum, there's two big questions, and we focused a lot on this one right here, but the other one is, hang on, I'll make sure I got a pen. Perfect. Okay. The first one we really focused on was this one. That's the major one. But also don't forget about number two right here, which is how much change should take place in society and how quickly should that change happen and how radical the change should be. But the first one is how much and in what areas should government or another authority figure be involved in people's lives? Generally, more involvement we tend to call, sorry, this is terrible, but I'm writing on the screen as it's open. More involvement, we would say, is less freedom, although freedom as a term isn't maybe the best. That's just what they use to describe it. It's not like they're taking rights away necessarily. It's just more government involvement. The second one, sorry, as we said, was how quickly should changes take place in society. The areas, again, are going to either be social or economic. Typically, there's other ways you can break it down, and sometimes those issues overlap one another. So on a test, I would try to make one that's pretty obvious which one would be. So again, social issues are political debates around morality, moral judgments, and just how people should live their lives and how much we want to regulate that. Behaviors, I would say, things that you do. Economic issues are about how society should distribute material resources. So we're talking money, banks, uh, business, taxes, business regulations. Taxes would be a good one. Healthcare in America is an economic industry. It's a business. Healthcare would be one, especially government spending on healthcare, government provisions of healthcare, welfare payments, even though those are kind of overlap. Immigration kind of hits into both of these depending on how you're viewing immigration. If you look at it solely as an issue of America's culture or the legality of coming into America or like how hard it should be to become an American citizen and what that means, that's a little more social. If you're looking at it as wages and job opportunities and things of that nature, then that would be more economic. So political viewpoints, here they are. This is, again, typically 10th grade government class. Liberal people on the liberal side of the perspective or a liberal point of view would be less regulation or control over people's social behavior. So we would call this more social, that's a plus sign, freedom, because there's less regulation. Again, freedom's a weird term for that, but that's what we would say. Okay. More regulation or less freedom over economic behaviors. Typically, I mean, what they're doing here is they're involving the government and the economy more. They usually say that that's for the purpose of spreading out equality, which might not always be the case, but that's usually why. But overall, in political science terms, we call this less economic freedom. Seeking change in society, being more embracive of change, or embracing change more. Tend to focus a little more on legislating equality. This is more from a policy perspective, advancing interests of social minorities, or at least using the government as the vehicle to do that. That's kind of how I'd say that. Democrats tend to lean more liberal. Democrat is a party, liberal is an ideology. Conservatives, again, more regulation or control over social behaviors. They often talk about tradition, going back to traditional values. So that would technically be less freedom because there's more regulation. Less regulation over people's economic behaviors. Again, more freedom, economic conservatism. Maintenance of status quo, more wary of changes. We have the word conserve in conservative. Okay, so maintaining the status quo is important. And then from a policy standpoint, there's a focus on legislating morality. So if you think of something like seeing drugs as a bad thing, or even like prostitution, for example, is a bad thing for society, people shouldn't act that way. So we're going to legislate things, make things illegal, make certain behaviors illegal because of a moral stance. Or traditional values is sometimes part of that too. So yeah, Republicans tend to lean more conservative on social and economic issues. That's really all you need to know. You could stop it there, but here's some examples of more control or less control. I'll let you pause it. I'm not going to go over every single one of these, but these kind of go into showing you how do we have social issues, how do we have economic issues, and how do we have less control or regulation. One issue is from a social standpoint, less gun control would actually kind of be a liberal issue because you're allowing people socially to have guns. I guess you could argue it's an economic conservative because gun ownership, like your freedom to buy guns as a good, I guess would kind of be economically conservative. So that's kind of how gun control fits in there. They want less gun control economically, but also socially. So anyway, it's kind of a weird one. But here's examples. You got social conservative, economic liberal, social liberal, economic conservative, and it just gives you different examples of different policies. This is my graphic that I made. So this is a way you can think about it. I put social freedom on the y-axis and economic freedom on the x-axis to have equal amounts of both. So kind of be like midway into this social freedom and midway into this economic freedom. This would be moderate. And then you kind of have to look at, all right, what are we doing? Are we increasing or decreasing freedom? One of the problems of this is that if you're going to move up and down the line kind of like this or like that, you're kind of doing a one-to-one. It's a slope of -1, right? So you're going to be doing a one-to-one exchange of social freedom for economic freedom. And that's not how humans operate. Like you can maintain your level of social freedom while changing your level of economic freedom. So just so you know, autocracy would be zero freedom. We'd have no freedom unless the government gives it to you or the authority figure. But then we would have democratic socialism because technically this is a government. So we wouldn't say socialism because that's an economic system. But democratic socialism is a democratic form of government that has a lot of socialistic tendencies in its economics. So they don't really do a lot with social freedom or social regulation, but they do a lot of economic regulation, particularly getting rid of private property and spreading out wealth equally would be a little more socialistic. A lot more socialistic. A theocracy is really the only type of government I can think of that would have a complete economic freedom, as in the government's not really involved in the economy, but really, really cares about legislating morality. It doesn't mean that religion has to be part of the political system. It's just the only real world example I could think of. But anyway, and then if you're off the grid, get off my lawn, you want max social freedom and max economic freedom, then you would be a libertarian. And if you notice, if you connect these like that, it kind of makes the political diamond. So you could flip it onto its side, like 90 degrees, and you would have the political diamond. So anyway, so if we take and then what we usually say is as you move up and to the left, you'd be getting more and more liberal. As you move down to the right, you'd be getting more and more conservative. And then you would have somewhere in general, you would have your Republicans in here and your Democrat Party in here. So for example, let's say you're a moderate. Let's say we have a proposal. Like we want to increase government or increase regulation on anything really. Let's say this is a common one is like the oil industry. You want to regulate oil in terms of for helping out climate change. Man, I cannot write on this thing though. So let's say you start at a moderate position. You have to think to yourself, okay, is this an economic situation or is this a social issue? Well, it's regulating an industry, a business. Okay, so that's going to be an economic issue. So we want to think about, okay, if we're moderates right here and we're about in the middle, are we putting more regulation into the economy or are we doing less regulation? Well, literally this is saying increasing regulation. So this is going to decrease economic freedom or inversely increase government involvement. So what we would do is we would say, okay, well, that's going to move us from here to like here, right? Okay. Then what we say is, all right, well, what if we want to maintain the same amount of social freedom? We don't want to change our social freedom. Like, because if we went all the way up to the line here, you'd be increasing social freedom. So let's say we just maintain our moderate social freedom. So we would just say, okay, this is what we've moved. We've moved from moderate here to moderate here. We've moved a little bit to the left, okay, economically. So we've gone more liberal. All right. Let's say we want to decrease taxes. Okay. Decrease taxes on, let's just say everyone, not even just wealthy people, which is a typical conservative statement you hear, right? We want to decrease taxes. Well, what that's doing is it's giving American people more money. It's decreasing the involvement of the government in your economic life. So it's going to become more conservative. So if we were here, right, and let's just say we maintain our same amount of social freedom, right? We don't want to change our social views. So, but we come to here in terms of economic freedom, then we're still conservative. We're not directly on the line, but we're moving down and to the right a little bit. So now we are becoming more conservative. We haven't changed our social freedom. We changed our economic freedom. If the graphic doesn't help, then just go off of whether or not it's giving you economic freedom or social freedom. Okay. You could also think about it as a change continuum. This isn't going to be on the assessment necessarily, but a typical moderate conservative or more conservative Democrat even would want to conserve or maintain the status quo. If you're looking at making change, having some change would kind of generally be the liberal, embracing change. It's a spectrum though. And then going like lots of change, like upend the entire system and go to like a socialized healthcare system, for example, that's going to be really progressive or democratic socialist, authoritarian potentially, but it depends on the type of change. And also, if you want to change things, but go back to the way things used to be, you have this nostalgia for like the tradition and how like way back when, how things used to be, that would be extreme conservative. And that depends on the type of change, but we would usually call that reactionary. So usually most things that happen in our politics are either going to be maintaining the status quo or making little changes. So that's kind of how you can see the liberal conservative breakdown. Here's some other ways of looking at it. This is from the Political Compass. This is, again, all this is this is my line just turned. I think, is it 90 degrees or 45 degrees? I don't know. Anyway, geometry is hard, but moderate would kind of be in the middle. And then as you increase economic freedom, you would be getting more and more conservative. As you decrease it, you would get more and more liberal. As you increase personal issues, personal freedom, you get more liberal. As you decrease it, you get more and more conservative. And if you want no one to have freedom, you'd be in this authoritarian box. If you want complete autonomy, you minimal government involvement, you'd be in a libertarian box. So it's just a different way of looking at it. You could literally just flip it. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, here's the viewpoint tree, decision tree. I kind of did this before, but this could help you if you want to take a screenshot of it or just pause it. This helps work through issues. Okay, looking at first, you have to decide what type of issue it is. Then you have to decide what is it doing. Is it changing, adding more freedom, going to tradition, less control, or sorry, more control, less freedom, liberal, conservative? Is it economic business issues, money, taxation, freedom versus control? And then you have to think, is it maintaining the status quo? Is it talking, a lot of times they talk about merit-based economics, the best ideas will rise to the top, less regulation, or is it more of a change, government regulation, less freedom? So that's that. That's how you decide. That's just a decision tree. But the big thing that I always tell people to start with is think about what type of issue it is. All right, that's it. Here's a check for understanding, but we already did this in class, so hopefully that helps. If you have a question, send me an email. I don't really check comments really, so email will be best, Teams. But yeah, we'll see you for the quiz, and hopefully everything goes well.